Hi there, Sarah of Get Weaving. Just a short video. Tips for threading your rigid heddle loom. This is my 16-inch Ashford rigid heddle loom. I've put on a skirt warp, it's hand-spun wool, for a skirt that I've made before. Used acid dyes on some fleece. This is my skirt that I'm going to make again. Very comfortable. So I've done all the calculations. And as you can see, I've got my warping frame clipped on as well. So I've dyed the fleece, spun and plied it, washed it. It's Oxford down from my friend's sheep, and it's about 25 degrees today, so I'm trying to get ahead of myself and make something for next winter. My friend Elizabeth showed me how to do this many times. I used to use a warping board all the time for indirect warping, and she had her 12-inch knitter's loom really early on. I didn't have one, and she had to show me this. It took me ages, but it comes in the booklet that you get with your loom anyway. So this is the most recent one, and the instructions are pretty much the same. We've just got a few extra bits to add. So hopefully you've started your project sheet and you've done your calculations, worked out how much you need, and you've made your mock-up, and you've done your wraps per inch. The top one shows when the warp and the weft are the same. The bottom one shows if the warp and the weft are different. You might have made a sample as well. So you know how much fabric you need to finish with once it's washed. You've also got to add loom waste. In my case, I had 20 inches. And you've got to add take up and draw in, whichever you call it. Now on the back here of my pattern, it shows what size piece of fabric I need finished to make this skirt. So I'm going to make, it's a knee-length skirt with pockets, and the warp is 150 inches long. So this is my project sheet so far. I need a piece of fabric 14 inches wide by 114 inches long. So I add 10% to the width, which would be 15.5, but I've made it 16, so it's the whole width. And the length 114 plus 10%, that's take up, plus 20-inch loom waist, so it's given me 146 inches. But I've done 150. I have pre-measured lengths of string, which I use. So I put this from the back stick through the heddle, round the warping frame until when I reach here, it measures the right length, 150 inches in this case. I just find it much easier using a pre-measured length of string. I know I'm not going to make a mistake then. And this string doesn't stretch, so obviously don't use a stretchy yarn for this. Now make sure you don't have any knots along the length of your warp. So all your knots are on the back stick. You don't want knots as you weave. I wind all my yarns into a ball and then I pull it from the centre. That way there's even tension. Obviously I'll have had this on the floor. And then I tie one colour. In this case, I'm doing an inch of each colour. Cut it off, tie on the new one, cut that off. Normally I would have this centred, but because I'm using the whole width of the heddle, I've just gone right the way across, one colour at a time. It's not a particular pattern. I was just trying to sort of spread the colours out a little bit. Just making sure that none of them really jump out too much. Right the way across to the other side. The only thing is, it doesn't matter with this because the yarn's all the same, but if the yarns were at all different, make sure you have the same ones on both edges. One of our top tips is to tie the back stick to the heddle, because you don't want this back stick wobbling around when you're threading up. It can make the tension go a bit squiffy. So I've threaded up. I can now undo that. Don't need that at the moment. And then I've got some choke ties. I keep these little bits, reuse them. They're jolly handy. Choke ties going along. And one through the end loop. I always weigh the yarns at the start and at the finish, just so I know how much I've used. And then I make a note of that. And I'm ready to wind onto my back stick. Now, this is something Elizabeth started to do, and I find really useful. Instead of taking the warp off the back peg, what she does is to unclamp the loom and to work from the loom towards the peg, because then it keeps your tension. If you unhook your warp from your end peg, you've got to hang on to it to stop it from just getting really loose. So I've started to do that now as well. I find that really useful. So what we're going to do is wind from the back instead of from the peg. And our other, well, one of our other top tips is to have numbered sheets of paper ready to go onto the back. Two reasons for that. One is that they make really good warp separators. So one sheet goes in as you roll onto the back stick, and starting with number 1, this will probably be about a 6-sheet project. Really useful. And then I know basically when I'm near the end and if I need to get any more weft yarn. Usually fairly safe. So you can see the loom is no longer clamped to the table. I've started to wind in with some paper. The tension is still nice and even, so I can wind this on. I've taken the first choke tie off. Sorry, it's a bit noisy. And this, I haven't got enough hands, but this will wind onto the back as I wind the loom forwards. So this is the end of the table, and my loom is walking towards the peg, and I've done the first sheet, so you can see there's a number 1 there, and then I'll tuck the next sheet in, and you can see the tension's still nice and even. What I'm going to do is wind a little bit more on, start sheet number 2, and then obviously it's going to get too tight, so what I'll just do is release this and put it round the next peg along, so there's still some tension on there. It's not just rolling around on the floor. Now you can see the paper is the width of the back roller. You don't want it any wider because it'll get caught in the corners here, but it must be wider than your warp. Otherwise these end threads are going to fall off the edge, and when you wind onto your back roller you'll find that they have taken a shorter path. So when you get to the end of your warp, you'll find that they're much longer than the rest, and you don't know why that's happened. And then of course when you're weaving, the tension on your edges will not be even. Now I've got about as far as I can because the loom is right next to the warping frame now, so I'm going to take this off this peg and just ease it a little bit. So I'm going to put it on that one for now. I can always walk the loom back a bit just to keep the tension, and then I can take the next choke tie off, and I'm going to keep doing that and adding in more sheets of paper until I'm done. So I'm on sheet number 3. As you can see, it's just the slots threaded at the moment. I'll do the holes in a moment. And I've moved the end loop up again a bit further. Every so often I'll just come around the front and just maybe check that there's no catches or loops. But as I said, this is all the same yarn. It's all hand spun wool. So there shouldn't really be any problems with this. If you're just starting, it's always helpful to have a friend do this with you. So one of you works at the front and one of you works at the back. But it is very possible to do it yourself. You just need to do it quite a few times to get the hang of it. So I'm pleased with this anyway. So I've just finished sheet number 3, and number 4 I can see is just tucked in just next to it. And then I can carry on winding. I'm going to bring the loom back to the edge of the table and put that loop on a closer one. But you can see you need to clear the space before you start. So it does help to have a big table. So I'm on sheet number 4. I've moved the loom back. The loop is on a peg on the warping frame. I haven't got much more to do. And then next thing is to cut the end loop, finish winding on, and then thread the holes. So I've wound onto the back roller. I'm on sheet number 5. I've cut the loop on the peg, left enough to tie onto the front stick or leash, whichever is your preference. I still like tying on, but that's just me. I've unclamped the warping board and I can put that away now because I don't need that anymore. And then I'm going to sit with the loom resting on the table on my lap and thread the holes in the heddle. Pleased anyway. Oops. So I'm going to sit here and thread the holes. I've got the wonderful Ashford plastic threading hook. So I use the larger end to thread the slots, and then I use the small end to thread the holes. And I've put everything else away. It's really annoying if you go somewhere and you leave any of your kit behind. So I've put the clamp back in there. I've got these ties, which, as I said, I keep. It's ever so handy to have all these bits and pieces. So I'm going to thread the holes and then tie onto the front. See you in a minute. So I'm sitting comfortably. The loom is propped up on the table. It's really good because it's got those notches in the back. And I'm threading with my threading hook. You have to go one direction or the other. It doesn't matter. I always go from left to right, probably because I'm left-handed. And that means that I always have a hole left on the left-hand side. But I don't worry about it. It's because they're in pairs. But you have holes on both ends. So you take 2 ends and you pull one of them back through and thread it through the hole. And then when I've done them, I pop them over the side there. I find it much easier. Do check every so often that you haven't missed one, because it's a bit of a pain to have to go back and redo it. Can't think of anything else at the moment. So I'll just plod on and then tie onto the front. Here we are, all threaded up. That took about half an hour. Now the next thing is tying onto the front stick. I know there are a lot of people who like leashing, and that's great. I don't know why, I just find this works for me. So no more than an inch in a bunch. So for me, because this is a 10 dent heddle, that would be no more than 10 threads. And then I'm going to work my way from the centre, left, right, and do the edges last of all. But it's in a single knot at the moment, because then later on I'll adjust it. By the time I've got to the edges, the centre one will have gone slightly soggy. So a single knot here, and then I'll take a bunch of about an inch and do one to the left, and then I'll do one to the right, and left, right, and so on and so forth. That way it stays nice and even. I would normally be doing this in the garden, but it's actually too hot today. I'm not complaining. So I'm all threaded up except the 2 edges. I'll do those in a minute. You can see they're all nice and parallel. Gaps aren't too big. The reason I say no big gaps is because otherwise when you start weaving, it's just going to take forever to close those gaps up. Now, as you can see, the middle ones have gone quite soggy. So that's when I do the second part of the knot. And what I do is I grab the ends and just pull it very gently away from the stick and then retie it in the second knot. I know leashing, I have done it and it's quick, but then I spend so much time adjusting it. I still find that the knots work for me and I don't mind untying them afterwards. So I'll tie the edges and then I'll do the second knots and then I'm ready to start weaving. I'm all tied on at the front. Same again, centre, left, right, left, right, left, right, and so forth. Edges last of all. And what I do is I bounce it just to see if it feels roughly the same. Don't skimp this stage. The weaving is going to take some time. It's worth spending a little bit of time at the beginning, because if the tension on any of these is wrong, you won't be able to get a decent shed. So when you lift and lower your heddle, the loose one is just going to have a mind of its own. So if needs be, if you can see that one's got caught or just looks a bit loose, untie that knot and retie it. It really is worth it. You can't rush this stage. It's just going to spoil it for you later on. Instead of it being nice to weave, it's going to be hard. And you'll probably have to undo it at some point anyway to fiddle with it. So you can see they're all running nice and parallel. They don't go in. I wouldn't want that. The idea being that my weaving stays pretty much the same width the whole way through. So I'm all tied on. As I start to weave, I'll find that I need to retension the warp quite frequently. What's happening is it's tightening up on the back roller. So the pieces of paper in between are getting slightly squashed together. So I can either wind from the front or I can wind from the back. But you can see I'm winding and it doesn't appear to be moving because it's just tightening up on that back roller. So I haven't actually decided what colour weft I'm doing. It's going to be yellow or green or something in between. So I'm going to weave a couple of inches of each. And because I've got an extra little bit on the warp, I should be able to do that. And then I'm going to stand back and look at it and squint at it and decide which one I like best. And the bits I don't like, I might cut out or I might keep. I'm not sure. Right, I think that's about it. This yarn is the same as the yarn that I used for a top, the sideways one that I made recently. So I might have a top and a skirt that go together. And also, I've managed to sort the mock-up up for this sundress. So it's really simple. It's got a casing at the top, front and back, and then there's a drawstring threaded through it. I've just put ribbon on for now. I ended up making 7 different versions of this until I got one that I liked. So next thing I'm going to do is set up my 20-inch Ashford knitter's loom for a sundress. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.